Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and I have some exciting news that I want to talk about in this episode of Geek Therapy Radio, and that is that GeForce Now has officially left beta stage. It's basically been in the beta stage since about 2013. We'll talk about that. But Nvidia GeForce Now has left beta, and it is now available to the public if you have Windows, Mac, or Android. But we're going to talk about all that stuff. What about Linux? What about iOS? We'll get into that. So let's talk about Nvidia GeForce Now.
Geek Therapy Radio.
So not too long ago, Google released Google Stadia, which is another cloud gaming service, and it was kind of a cluster F. I can't cuss on here. I don't want to cuss on here, I should say, but Google Stadia was met with some criticism. It just didn't seem like it was ready yet. It was kind of a cluster F. There were device restrictions. So anyways, we're not talking about Google Stadia specifically here. The pricing for Google Stadia was a bit confusing. The game library was a bit limited, and I think a lot of this can be chalked up to the fact that just Google Stadia is a new service. And Google Stadia only runs through Google Chrome, whereas GeForce Now is its own sort of standalone app. Now, a lot of those things some of those things aren't necessarily huge knocks against Google Stadia. As I mentioned, it's kind of a new service. But GeForce Now has been around for at least the past 7 years as of recording this episode of the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. It's been around in one name or another since 2013. So GeForce Now is officially open to the public, officially open to the public across all major platforms except for iOS and Linux. And we'll start off there. That's a real shame that it especially doesn't come to iOS, because playing GeForce Now on an iPad would have been amazing. So would the possibility of playing AAA titles on a Raspberry Pi Linux distro. Now, I know that is wishful thinking. That's easier said than done for a number of reasons in regards to the Raspberry Pi, and that's probably an understatement. So you got ARM chip limitations, video encode and decode protocols to deal with. It's a challenge, to say the least. Maybe they'll smooth that out one day. Maybe we'll get GeForce Now on Raspberry Pi. That would be awesome. But as of now, there's not even a whisper of it in the wind. So we'll move on. I just love the Raspberry Pi. But let's stay on track. So there's also no immediate plans as of this is from Nvidia themselves. There's no immediate plans for iOS version of GeForce Now on iPad or Apple TV. You know, that would make too much sense to have it release on iOS. But Apple is notoriously iron-fisted with its grip on their App Store. I imagine it's a headache Nvidia doesn't want to address anytime soon, especially during its first public rollout. And in regards to Linux, I imagine it's less about a headache and more about prioritizing the bulk of gamers on the most popular operating systems. There may be roundabout ways of using software like Wine to get GeForce Now running on Linux, but either way, GeForce Now is not officially supported natively on Linux at this time, at least yet. I have a feeling that would probably change in the future. So Linux users, I have a pretty good feeling that sometime in the future, we'll get GeForce Now running natively on Linux, or at least most distributions of Linux. Anyways, the bulk of the market share, and this is no surprise, is on PC, Mac, and Android, at least for now. Linux users make up a very small part of that gaming market share, even though there is a Steam client for Linux itself. There's no GeForce Now for now. I really, really do hope, though, that iOS GeForce Now comes out, that GeForce Now for iOS comes out sooner than later. Really, I think Nvidia, whether it's their fault or not, is leaving a lot on the table by not having iOS support right now, but I have a feeling that I have a feeling there's somebody at Nvidia talking to Apple right now trying to make that happen. So that may happen sooner than later. So who knows? Maybe in the next year or so, next few months, whatever the case may be, I think we'll see iOS first, hopefully, maybe, and then Linux around the same time, maybe. That's all speculation. But for now, PC, Mac, and Android, GeForce Now is available. So what's so great about GeForce Now? I'll go over some important details here, but rest assured we'll get to the massive caveats and potential downsides later because they exist. First, a 15 megabits per second internet connection on the fastest interface possible. Nvidia recommends 30 megabits per second for 1080p 60 frames per second, and you'll also want to be within line of sight of a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi router, or better yet, have a physical Ethernet connection. More on that when we get into the cons inherent to game streaming in general, Stadia or GeForce Now. So GeForce Now currently offers 2 tiers. You can get it for free, get a free account, and $5 a month or $5 a month for a Founders Edition account. So what do you get with either account? Now, if with a free account, you're limited to hour-long sessions, 1 hour-long sessions, but you can hop right back in and reset the timer again. So let's say you're playing a video game for an hour, Nvidia boots you off, just launch the video game again and you'll be right back into it. And there's a reason for all that. The free tier is also like flying standby. You don't get priority access to servers and hardware. For instance, when running Doom 2016, I can check on some system stats while I'm playing. Since the free account is non-priority, sometimes I get a GPU with around 24 gigs of VRAM, and other times it connects me to one with only 7 or 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So it's first come, first serve as far as who gets the best hardware and the best connections. That's on the free account. Moving up to the next tier, there's only 2 tiers currently available. Moving up to the Founders Edition tier, $5 a month, you get priority access to NVIDIA's servers and hardware, and the ability to turn on ray tracing. And gaming sessions are bumped up from 1 hour to 6 hours. Now, I know some gamers will scoff at a 6-hour limit, but most people don't game that long in one sitting. Most. Either way, there's a reason for this once we get to the cons discussion. Although my gut tells me that the type of gamer who'd complain about a 6-hour time limit per gaming session probably doesn't need NVIDIA GeForce Now. If you're gaming over 6 hours at a time per sitting, you probably have a pretty beefy gaming PC already. That's just speculation, but I bet dollars to donuts that if you're that intense of a gamer, you have that intense of a gaming PC natively. So one of the benefits GeForce Now has over Google Stadia is its integration with Steam. Lots of games you already own on Steam can be played with NVIDIA GeForce Now on any device, as long as it's Mac, PC, or Android. However, this list is always fluctuating, at least regarding remote play away from your home network, because if you are on your home network and your gaming PC is logged into Steam on that same network anywhere on the local network, you'll have access to a lot more of your Steam library, as the games won't be run on NVIDIA's server, but they'll be running on your own gaming PC on the same network and piped over that same network to any devices logged into GeForce Now. So if you have your Android smartphone in the living room paired to some Bluetooth controller in your main gaming PC is upstairs in your bedroom, running GeForce Now will give you access to your Steam library on your main gaming PC in your room in the same house on the same network. Versus when you go off networks, let's say you log in to GeForce Now at work or at school or something like that, you're only going to be able to play what is available on NVIDIA's servers. So if you're on GeForce Now while you're away from home, or you're at home and your gaming PC is turned off, the list of streaming games is always fluctuating. Your favorite game may not be currently available on NVIDIA's themselves. My advice would be to take advantage of the free account and see if your game is currently available. Now, let's talk about settings. So maximum stream quality settings apparently cap out at 1080p 60 frames per second. Apparently at one point a few years ago when GeForce Now was still in beta, it experimentally supported 1080p 120 frames per second, but I cannot confirm that and certainly have no way of testing it. 4K support also appears to be lacking. My buddy and I tried to run it on his 5K Mac display, and the highest setting was still 1080p. 4K is not available, at least at launch. Now, these limitations may seem baffling to some, and on the surface, they do furl some eyebrows for sure. Let's talk about that for a moment, because it will segue perfectly into cons and caveats. Cloud gaming with GeForce Now means running games on Nvidia's own state-of-the-art GPUs in giant server farms, complete with ray tracing. Now, for instance, Google Stadia runs on AMD GPUs, by the way. So running games on I can't even talk. Running games on such inaccessibly powerful hardware to the layperson means that you can technically run games at 120 frames per second and beyond, especially since you can tweak settings just as if they were running on your own local hardware. So why is Nvidia capping it at 1080p 60 frames per second, at least currently? All of that said, you can run games at 120 frames per second by selecting competitive mode under settings. However, this locks resolution to just 720p. I imagine this will change over time, but this is still a perfect segue into cons and caveats, and thank you for bearing with me. So, I have been dabbling with GeForce Now since I bought my first Shield Portable in 2014. The Shield Portable actually came out in July of 2013, actually, but I didn't get it till 2014. So GeForce Now game streaming under one name or another has existed since then, 2013. Nvidia has about 7 years of a head start over Google. OnLive tried it a few years before that, and a Finnish company called G-Cluster demonstrated the technology back at E3 in the year 2000. Arguably, the technology can be traced as far back in one way or another to the 1980s, using server farms to share the load of a program and stream output to a single interface or monitor. So here's the thing. Physics is an inescapable force of the universe that cannot be altered. The speed of light, for the sake of argument, is a constant. Also, there's only so fast you can push electrical current through wires. So, as fast as it is, either over fiber optics or good old-fashioned copper, there is no way to completely eliminate latency. At a certain point, you reach the limit of what is physically possible. This applies to Nvidia as much as it does Google. Cloud gaming is 100% bound by physics and infrastructure. That's a big one. Infrastructure. The person using GeForce Now that lives 1 mile from the server farm and their ISP will have a better experience than the person living in Montana whose nearest neighbor may be 75 miles away, let alone the nearest ISP and server farm. His ISP might be 300 miles to the west, and the nearest Nvidia server may be 700 miles to the east. These are completely arbitrary, but you get what I'm saying here. That said, depending on where you live, how you're connected, either Wi-Fi or hardwired Ethernet connection, and what you play, the experience can be virtually perfect at its best, with not much distinguishable difference compared to running the game on your own hardware. Now, lag and latency seem to be darn near perfect in this hardwired case, where you are close to your ISP and closer to NVIDIA servers. The only noticeable hiccup being the occasional burp in video compression quality when the network gets a little gassy and fussy. For instance, playing a game like Doom at maximum GeForce Now settings over a wired Ethernet connection is truly astonishing when you consider what's happening technologically. It's like looking into the future of gaming. However, while an esport like Rocket League is certainly playable under these ideal conditions, we are a long, long way from competition gaming over the cloud. In competitions for actual money where individual frames matter, cloud gaming may never beat running games on local hardware, again, because of physics. There's less lag when your mouse, keyboard, and monitor are 3 feet away from the CPU and GPU versus hundreds of miles away from the CPU and GPU in a server farm with an ISP in between. So thus far, I've been talking about GeForce Now and effectively all of cloud gaming over a hardwired Ethernet connection. What about Wi-Fi? What about over a cellular network? So straight up, Wi-Fi is a crapshoot. A real roll of the dice. No other way to put it. You'll need to be close to a 5 gigahertz router for any amount of possible enjoyment. And may God have mercy on your soul over 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. But again, for casual gaming, GeForce Now over a hardwired connection is your best bet and can be absolutely jaw-dropping. It is truly state-of-the-art. But let's talk about the last bugaboo. Here in the United States especially, many of us, if not most, have data caps. For instance, if I go over 1 terabyte of data per month, I get charged outrageous fees for every gigabyte I go over. So the free tier of GeForce Now limits you to 1-hour sessions before making you relaunch the game. Okay, that's understandable. But that 6-hour limitation on the paid tier serves 2 purposes. First, to clear out AFKs, away from keyboards, from precious server real estate. That is, if you get up from your computer and leave the connection on, it'll boot your ghosting fanny. It's also looking out for your data cap. At maximum settings, GeForce Now will be sucking down around 15 gigabytes of data per hour. So 6 hours times 15 gigabytes per hour equals 90 gigabytes over 6 hours. That's around 10% or so, give or take, of my 1 terabyte monthly data cap. 10%. 1 6-hour session at maximum settings. 10% of my data cap. That means if I have GeForce Now running at those settings for 6 hours a day, I'll hit my data cap in about 11 days. Now, it is silly that data caps are still a thing going past 2020, but it's where we're at. One of the biggest hurdles for cloud gaming is how it can absolutely shred through your data cap. My hope is that cloud gaming becomes another strong argument towards removing data caps, but for now, it is something to consider when you fire up GeForce Now or any cloud gaming service. But here's where it also gets interesting. There are some games that are close to and well over 100 gigabytes in size to download onto your local hard drive. That means it's 10% of a 1 terabyte data cap just to download the game. It may well be the case that you decide it's more efficient to use that data and just stream the game of that size than use up the same amount of data to download it. Conversely, it would make 0 sense to stream a small game at 15 gigabytes an hour when downloading it may only take up 1 gigabyte. Now, I do realize that the point of GeForce Now is that you can run graphically intense games on low-end hardware. You wouldn't download a 100 gigabyte game onto an old dual-core netbook, in other words. But my previous points are still good to keep in the back of your mind. So to wrap this up, having dabbled with GeForce Now for the past few years on my Shield Portable, Shield Tablet, and Shield TV, I've always been fascinated by the theory of it all. And while at its best, in its best possible conditions, it feels truly revolutionary, the fact remains that in most conditions, there's still a lot to be desired and a lot to work on. That said, cloud gaming is still in its infancy, but as of this recording, I think it's obvious that for all its inherent hurdles, Nvidia GeForce Now has a huge leg up on its competition. As of recording this, if you're running macOS, Windows, or Android, and especially if you already have a Steam account, you'd be silly not to give GeForce Now a try, especially for free. So tinker around with the various connection options and the settings in GeForce Now and let me know how it goes. But more importantly, we're all geeks about something, so lean into your inner geek. Know that you are worthy of love and your own self-respect, and I'll see you next time. Take care.